What a night. What a day. What an election cycle. Thank you for joining Daniel's Inferno. My name is Daniel. So today we are going to be talking about the ramifications and my opinions on what happened in the election, as well as where do the opposition, the Conservatives, go from here. There is growing sentiment, apparently, of separatism in Alberta. The hashtag Wexit has been trending, so we're going to discuss the facts about that. And we're going to talk about a few surprising, or maybe not surprising, but more impactful MPs or results from the election. As you can see, today's helper is Peter Baelish from Game of Thrones. Anyone familiar will know that he is the political machinator. He is the one who tries to puppeteer the scenes. And I believe this election cycle has been a divisive one, as divisive as Peter Baelish makes things in the show. So, very clearly, we need to start with who won. It is a Liberal minority government. Minority governments are not common in Canada, but they have happened in the past. There are some ramifications regarding that. Firstly, it was the first time in history, second time, my apologies, in history, that a Prime Minister has not received the popular vote. The popular vote went to the Conservatives. We are in a first-past-the-post system, not a proportional representation. So it's based off electoral districts and ridings, not so much the vote share. So, minority government. They don't tend to last very long. I actually predict that we will probably see another election within the 2 to 3 years instead of the 4-year term. This is just based off of the history of minority governments. They don't tend to last. If you're able to cobble together enough people to shoot them down, which at the moment is possible. The Bloc Québécois made quite a resurgence in Quebec. The Liberals did not make, well, they lost actually, any ground they had in Western Canada, being Alberta and Saskatchewan. They have some ground in BC, which is still Western Canada, but this Wexit stuff has been centered around Saskatchewan and Alberta. The NDP lost almost half their seats, and the Conservatives made, conservative gains in this election. So, firstly, I'm going to talk about some of the surprising things, or things that were more memorable in the election. Firstly, Jody-Wilson Raybould. People might remember her from the SNC-Lavlin scandal that happened here in Canada a year or two ago. She was our Attorney General. She ran as an independent, and she won. Good for her. It's very difficult for independents to get somewhere in our system. So I give her credit, especially after all the media attention that was brought to her after everything that happened. As you can see, she's going back as an independent, but independents often aren't able to do very much, unfortunately. So, that was one thing. Another thing to talk about is Maxime Bernier, leader of the PPC, which was Canada's fledgling right party. He lost his seat in Quebec. He had been there in, I can't excuse my pronunciation, in Boise in Quebec, and he lost it. He had been there since 2005, lost to the Conservatives. What this means for the PPC, we're not sure. Are they going to continue? Will they not continue? Time will tell. They got about 300,000 votes, which is not bad for a party that started a year ago. There has been quite a lot of negative press about them, either duly or unduly. I leave that to your own judgment. And yeah, I have to say they had people in every riding, which that alone was an impressive feat. They didn't do very well, obviously, this election, especially with their leader, as I said, losing a seat. We'll find out in a week or so where they go, what that means for them. Okay, so that is Jody and that is Maxime Bernier dealt with. Let's talk a little bit about this Wexit controversy. So, Wexit, you may think it sounds very much like Brexit. And that is because it was named after Brexit, quite clearly. And people in Alberta and Saskatchewan are upset because they do not have any representation in the government, firstly. Secondly, at least from what I've been reading, there has been growing sentiment about their economic situation with the lack of pipeline help that they've received. They are where our oil and gas, a lot of our oil and gas is concentrated in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So it's not a surprise that they were entirely blue. In fact, when you look at the map, the electoral map of Canada, every province was very, very pure to one side. And that's one of the reasons I say it was very divisive. That goes to show that the usual Canadian mentality of what's best for the situation, that's changed very clearly. So, Wexit, as I said, they're worried about the lack of representation in the government. They're worried about the pipelines. And lastly, from what I can see, they are worried about the fact that they have 4.3 billion, or goodness, sorry, 4.3 million, a population of 4.3 million collectively, I believe, and they have 34 seats. And Atlantic Canada, which would be Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, that direction, has a population of 2.3 million, I believe, or 2.6 million, somewhere in that range. But they have 32 seats. So I guess another issue that people have is the fact that those numbers, there's 2 million more people, that only equates to 2 more seats. I will give my own personal opinion on that at the end of this, but that's the information as I was able to find it regarding this Wexit stuff. As you can see, it's been trending on Twitter. It's gotten a lot of attention in the Canadian media, which it rightly or wrongly, I don't think necessarily it should be given this much attention. I think it should be touched upon and the fact should be said, and that's that. So, if you're interested, you can go ahead and you can search Wexit here on Twitter. You can see what people are saying, and rightly or wrongly, there's some feeling of resentment growing, and Trudeau has his work cut out for him to try to include that part of the country or have them feel included. And I actually have a few opinions on that. Again, I'll give that closer to the end. Lastly, I think it's important to talk about the opposition party, the Conservatives, and how the Conservatives did in this the whole grand scheme of things, what people are saying. I have an article or two here to show you from the National Post and the Globe and Mail. So I think it's important that it's mentioned. It's not in this article, it's in the Globe article. In fact, I'm going to bring that up because for some reason this National Post article is acting a bit strange. Andrew Scheer fails to heed lessons from voters is the title, and I think there is some merit in that. Uh, it was a long. I don't think it was a long campaign. In fact, I think this was one of the shorter campaigns in Canadian memory. But it was definitely bitter. Um, I think this first little bit here that party leaders would at bare minimum show they've taken on board the message from voters. I think that should always be what party leaders do. It's not often what happens, but it is what should happen. All the parties in the vote were humbled, except for the Bloc, as they gained like 25 seats or something insane. Um, you know, it goes on to say how unfortunately it looks like for Andrew Scheer, he is not working on reconciliation, at least based off of some remarks he was making. To some people, it seems like he's still on the campaign trail. I think after an election is done, we as a country and our political parties and the leaders should work together on bridging the divide and not making it worse. And I think things like Wexit and things like Shearless Tuesday, or Scheer making these remarks about going after the Liberals, and again, like he was saying how Trudeau was attacking the energy sector, demonizing Conservative premiers, mentions how what I mentioned, how the Liberal government has zero representation from those provinces. It's a little unfortunate, I think, that Scheer is not reflecting on what went right and what went wrong in this election. I think all parties need to reflect on what the Canadian votes imply. They need to look at the situation and they need to try to move forward. Disclaimer, I am now going to give my own personal opinion. It is going to be from a political slant, my own, where I stand politically. If you're here just for the unbiased discussion, I appreciate it. This is probably where you bow out. I am personally a Conservative. I had hoped the Conservatives would form a minority government and not a majority. I didn't think there was a lot of time for people to really see the leaders and to question the leaders. There were only 3 debates, I believe, and only one of them was in English. And the Monk debates never happened. Trudeau totally he stayed away from that. People are trying to say the SNC-Lavlin stuff is ancient history at this point, when we really haven't gotten answers to what happened. At least I don't feel like we have. But to see Scheer attacking and continuing like it were 2 days ago is a little disappointing. I would like to see him, again, work on bridging the divide, not increasing the cracks. And I think by continuing in a very aggressive, tribalistic way, all you're doing is, firstly, you're incentivizing this Wexit stuff because it's all Conservative over in those 2 provinces. So when they see the leader acting this bombastic and this aggressive, it only makes it so that that feeling grows. No, I think that Trudeau has his work cut out for him. I think we'll see an election in 2 to 3 years. And I honestly think Scheer should have resigned. Obviously, people don't trust him. He has not had people buy that he will not allow his theological place, which there's nothing wrong with being religious, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. My grandmother, who raised me, was the most Christian woman ever. But when you're running for a country, when you're running to become the leader of a country, and you're religious, you need to show people that religion will not intersect that the church and state are still separate, and you realize that. And I don't think I don't know if he got the chance, but even if he had the chance, I don't know if he would have done the job at convincing people that he wouldn't reopen the abortion debate, that he wouldn't, go after reproductive rights, that he wouldn't go after gay marriage, some of these issues that he is allowed to have his own personal opinion on, but publicly needs to follow the narrative that our country has kind of laid out, and that, when something's closed, it's closed, and those issues are closed. Everyone deserves equal rights. Abortion is a right that is allowed in this country up until X amount of months, and that's the end of it. So I don't think he did a good job in this election. I think he had the chance to form a government, and he totally missed it. So we'll see what happens. I would like to see his base and the Conservative Party leadership themselves tell him it's time to go, and to maybe put someone who's a little more charismatic, either a little less theologically driven or a little more emphatic about the fact that he will not allow those two things to meld together. I really appreciate, I'm at 11 subscribers. Thank you all so much for giving me the time, watching my videos, sharing, liking, commenting, and being part of the discussion. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful day. Canadians, let's see where we go from here. Thank you very much.